so much. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's great to be here today, and I know we're on the final days of the conference, the last 2 or a few more, and it's great to see. I just want to give a shout out to like all the amazing presentations, workshops, all of that that's happened in the past few days. It's really cool to learn about like the new things that are happening and the projects like DuckDB, Polars, IBIS, my PyMC, and these tools are all great. Like you can download them, use them, and they're all free. But once you start using them, you maybe want to dig a bit deeper. You want to maybe join the community. You want to get more involved, and it's really hard to like figure out how to get become part of that, right? Like sometimes those paths are not as clear cut. Those paths are sometimes a bit hazy, and I certainly struggled when I started to try to get more involved in community and open source. So that's what this presentation is about. This presentation, I want to go over how institutions can come and help people get more involved in open source or encourage open source contribution, and also talk about the program that we have at Bloomberg and how that's really helped me get involved more. But before that, I wanted to show you a representation of open source. Here, I'm pretty sure everyone knows XKCD, and a lot of things are built on top of open source, and we use it without thinking about who makes the project, who maintains the project, and all the technologies like curl, Kubernetes, any of that. But sometimes, as older projects, have been built, maybe the maintainers might, leave, try to do something else. So the burden really falls on like maybe a few, or even in this case, one maintainer that is, who might happen to be in Nebraska, that has been maintaining it and sustaining this whole open source infrastructure for everyone. And we need to like think about it as a community, how we can come together and help and not take the burden of these people and make it a collaborative effort. And today I really have 3 goals in mind, right? The first is I want to talk about what is open source, right? I'm pretty sure everyone here knows what open source is, but I also want to highlight some of the challenges that newcomers face when they try to get more involved in open source. Then I want to go into how I started. I definitely struggled at the start to come up, figure out how to join, and how I benefited from Bloomberg's program on getting involved and beginning my journey. And then finally, I want to finish by talking about how we can scale our efforts, right? Like how we can bring other institutions or other individuals into this open source community and not just consume open source and use it, but also give back to it as they see fit. But before I start that, I just want to give a quick introduction of myself. I'm Kaushik. I'm a software engineer at Bloomberg working on geospatial data. And I've been at Bloomberg for around 3 years, working full-time. Then before that, I was in college. I've used open source in college, but not as much. And only in the past year, I've actually thought about how we actually get open source and begin to contribute back myself for some projects that I'll talk about in the future. So to start, I just want to go over open source, and open source means a lot of things, or open source can mean different things to different people. And there are many ways to really define open source. And one method that one such statement that I really like was from Brett Cannon, who is in the Python Software Foundation. He also was I think a Python steering council member, and and he has a great blog called Snuggy Canadian. I hope you all check it out. But he just phrased it as open source software is source code that is licensed in such a way that I can use it for free. And that's really great, right? I think it's there's many things that I think are missing. One part I feel should be involved is the community that surrounds open source. But I think he's just highlighting that it's source code, so you can actually see the underlying code on maybe Bitbucket, GitHub, or GitLab, or any of those sorts, and you can actually use it for free without having to pay and utilize it, right? But why was I drawn to open source? There were many reasons I was drawn to open source, but for the sake of brevity, I think one of the reasons was to keep up to date with latest technologies. Over the past few days, There have been a lot of cutting edge technologies, a lot of ways, a lot of GPU, usages, and that whole movement. And it's really interesting to know what's out there. So if you have existing workflows, or if you want to think of scaling your workflows, it will be really good to be in the know. The second is development practices. Since these open source technologies are so big, so vast, used by so many different kinds of people, there's different things about what tools you use, code quality standards, testing frameworks, and documentation, and so much more. So it's really good to get involved in that and know about what's out there, and what are the best practices in the industry. And then the final thing I think is some sort of allure of open source. It actually kind of started in my journey. I went to college. I wanted to major in biology, but I soon came to realize that I didn't like the wet lab stuff, so I wanted to go into computational biology with data. So I joined this computational biology lab soon after learning how to program in Python. And my professor was just she just dumped a massive CSV on me and it's run principal component analysis and give it back to me at the end of the week. I had no idea how to do that. I didn't even know what that meant. I Googled what principal component analysis was, and it was a bunch of math, and I was no way am I going to do that. But then once I started reading about it, I came across pandas that really helps import it to CSV. Then I realized PCA is basically 2 lines of Python with scikit-learn. You can just do pca.raw fit or something like that. And it's just super easy because there's been people that have faced this issue, contributed back to open source, so it makes other people's lives easier. And I really was able to show off as a freshman, which is really cool. And so I do think that there's some sort of allure to what open source is. It's like a car, right? We all know how to drive a car, but it's kind of looking inside and trying to figure that out. It can be scary because there's so much out there that you really don't know. But I really wanted to learn about it and discover what it is. And so, but open source is more than just a community of people, and there are multiple different kinds of stakeholders that actually contribute to open source and use it. Most notably is the users like us who download open source and use it for analysis, like me as a freshman who just use it for running an analysis. But there's also the maintainers and contributors and the funders, right? The funders are people nonprofits or corporates that provide funding or provide some sort of support so these open source communities and open source projects can sustain themselves. NumFOCUS is a very good one, and it's just supports so many different kinds of projects, and it makes it available for so many scientists, researchers, companies to actually benefit from them, right? And not all these users use it in the same way. If we can kind of think of it as a pyramid, right? We can think of the users making up most of the people that interact with open source. And then you have the contributors that look at create issues, make PRs to fix some security bugs. And then you have the maintainers that worry about security vulnerabilities and long-term visions and stuff like that. But I was for a long time a user of open source, and I wanted to figure out how can I go up at next part of that pyramid. How can I become a contributor in maybe 1 or 2 of the projects? And I found that really tricky because there's a lot of places that you can get stuck, right? Many of these projects have been built for so many years, so big. So when you git clone them, it can take a little bit to download, and then once you look into it, it's really hard to build that project. You have all sorts of dependency issues. Maybe your Python version is not the same, something like that, or they have complex builds. Some part of it can be solved using the GitHub code spaces, which I wish I knew earlier, where you can just press the period key on your keyboard, and it opens up everything inside your window, downloads all the dependencies, and kind of makes it work almost. But that just makes life easier, right? But then once you're there, you don't know how these projects were there. If I downloaded pandas today, I wouldn't know how all these projects were. So there's some sort of lack of technical mentorship. If I was working on a project within a company, I was able to tap someone's shoulder and ask them, hey, how did you do this? But with an open source project, these people are in different time zones all around the world, and it's really hard to get connected to them. And then once you do, it's really hard to know how you actually go about contributing to open source. There's different rules of engagement where each package has its own rules. Some packages need you to sign like an agreement before you actually contribute. Some packages make you make an issue and discuss what you want to do before you actually make a pull request to do it. And when you talk about that, like sometimes the maintainers are very attentive for like a week and then they disappear for like months on end because they went on break and then come back. So you have like these really long feedback cycles. So it can get like really tricky when you're like just starting out. You don't really know how this ecosystem works. And then there's always like some sort of like imposter syndrome, right? Like these projects have been there for years, maybe even decades. Do I know how, do you think I know how, these projects work from like end to end? Is what I'm doing the right way of doing it? Has this already been done before, like 3-4 years ago? So there's a lot of different things a lot of challenges, that newcomers face, and you need to have some sort of like hand-holding to allow them to, just begin contributing to these projects. The good thing about this is that there are many programs that come to support in these instances. Some, provide funding in terms of MLH fellowship or Google Summer of Code. There's also some that, have good first issues. But even then, even with these programs, there are always challenges for many of the newcomers that still persist, right? So I want to talk about how at Bloomberg, we've tried to bridge this gap or this disconnect that exists, and try to build a program that supports open source, in the way where we consume open source and we want to give back to it, back to the community. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about Bloomberg and the culture. And Bloomberg has a huge culture of philanthropy, and a majority of our profits go towards charity. For example, it can go towards the environmental causes, public health, government innovation, arts, education, both high school and college. And it's really sometimes like great to work at a company where we care about more than just the bottom line, where our work actually makes a difference in like the global community. And since Bloomberg is spread across the world, like there are communities in almost all the continents where we support, we help that. And this program, we have a program that connects employees to different mentorship opportunities, like you can work with soup kitchens, making kits, dog walking, all these sorts of different kinds of events that happens in different cities. And this program has been integrated into the Bloomberg culture and the fabric. And it's been there for years, or even decades almost. And so one way and one of the programs that's there is to match volunteer hours with charitable contributions. And here I think we have a great example by Stephanie, who is my fellow colleague, and also a member of PyData, the PyData community. And each year, Stephanie performs around 50 hours of community service and volunteering through different kinds of programs. And at the end, through Bloomberg's dollars per hours, Bloomberg matches her volunteer hours with donation to a charitable cause. Stephanie is fond of the mission of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, so she was able to donate $5,000 to this foundation every year. And over the course of many years, she herself has donated more than $50,000, towards this foundation. And I think that's great, right? But how can we improve on this, right? Like, open source is a public good, and it is critical to our digital infrastructure, and it is our collective responsibility to help sustain this, shared public good. So the open source program office works with the corporate philanthropy office within Bloomberg to come up with a new strategy to tackle a new program, and that is open source volunteer hours for charitable contributions. And this works in 3 steps. First is like, a person that is interested in contributing to open source finds an eligible project. All projects within NumFOCUS and Apache are eligible, and there are many other open source projects that are there. And then they start contributing to this project, or they find tickets or bugs or reach out to the maintainers to begin contributing. And then once those contributions and you accrue that many hours, you're able to choose and donate to a charity of your choice, right? And this program really builds on the existing Bloomberg infrastructure and the program that already exists within the company. So what did this look like at my open source impact, right? So I work on geospatial data, so I work with GeoPandas a lot, and I know that's been mentioned in many of the talks today, over the past few days, and it is part of NumFOCUS. So I was curious about how to get started with this, but I always thought it's a huge hurdle, insurmountable. I didn't know where to even start. But with this program, I actually met a bunch of other people who also regularly contribute to open source. One was actually Pablo Galindo, who was in the Python steering committee, and he talked about how his first contribution ever was a typo in Python. And then he became the package manager of like 3.10 and 3.11, and like now works on very complex, like I think compiler stuff with like Guido, the guy that created Python himself. But he started in like a very simple way, and this really like brought not just me but many other people into that ecosystem, working on multiple different projects. And so once I accrued my hours, I think I was able to like donate it back to a charity. My choice was SAYA, which is South Asian Youth Action, and I've worked with them for mentoring like high school students to get into college. They have like a place in Queens, and I go there like almost every weekend. And I was able to help donate like $5,000 towards that program, and they were able to like help with that. And it's kind of great, like it kind of married both of like things that I was kind of passionate about, and like open source, which we've all like used, and Messiah, which is something that I regularly work with, right? But this is not just, I know like companies are different. Each company has its own programs, or this program might look like have different colors in different companies. And so, but Bloomberg is trying to scale our responsibility and how we interact with open source. And so Bloomberg has like built a framework for sustaining open source engagement, and we provide two key things, right? Like time and money. And the program that I talked about mainly was employee giving, which is where we have open source contributions being matched as dollars for charities. We also have employee volunteering. We work with open source foundations, which for like long-term governments and digital infrastructure. And we have a FOSS contributor fund, where internal people vote on which packages have impacted them the most, and we support those packages. So some of the packages are, for example, PyData, NumPy, Pandas, and those are just in NumFOCUS, and there are more like outside of NumFOCUS too. And so this is like really great. We're thinking about moving beyond consumption. We're thinking about how we can actually sustain open source and start to give back. Because if you think about that XKCD diagram on the second slide, like we've built a lot of infrastructure, on open source. Depending on it, a lot of our systems are, utilizing it in some way. How can we give back to the community that has like given us so much? And yeah, so now I think thinking about what is your way of sustaining open source. We have people from the open source program office here who have made this project neat, and is something that I'm like grateful for, because I'm able to like try out open source. And yeah, that's the presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to like ask or come up. I'll be here. Yes.
What do you attribute? It seems like Bloomberg has a sort of distinctive emphasis on like philanthropy in their corporate culture.
Yes.
What do you make of that, and how would you like? What is it in their corporate culture that you think like encourages that, and like how? I guess maybe a more practical question would be like, if you're in a small enough organization that you can like speak to leadership.
Yeah.
What do you think you emphasize to them in order to help foster that interest?
I think it's like I think the program office, like I think it's like multiple different incentive structures. I think it's like, yes, to a part, like talking to like management and convincing them that open source is important to contribute back to. But I think it's also about them listening to like people's and within Bloomberg there are a lot of people that do contribute and have their voices heard and like speak in an open dialogue on like the importance of it. And there's no question that every engineer knows that open source is important, right? And like contributing back is like a key thing that should be prioritized. And that's sort of the way that I think Bloomberg has gone about it. What's unique about it is that the culture of giving has always been there. And so to integrate open source as one method of giving, because we already have like volunteer hours that a lot of the engineers and a lot of people within Bloomberg give already, it was just like adding that avenue of this is also a mechanism or a vehicle that we can give to.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
How important, you mentioned like technical mentorship.
Yeah.
And is that something that Bloomberg sort of, it sounds like there was a little bit of encouragement maybe that this is a possibility to contribute to open source. Like how important do you think that part was?
The technical mentorship?
Yeah.
I think it depends on the sort of way that you want to contribute. Like some people you don't necessarily need it for everyone, but I do think that having that support internally, having some maintainers, come and give their time, because I know like you're flooded with a lot of tickets. Giving those opportunities for people to just get started, right? Like getting your foot in the door is like an important way. And for some people, it does benefit a lot just to have that background, have that connection, have someone that you reach out to. And I think that's like key for a lot of people. Okay. Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.